Where was the first
Like I said, we diving deep down into the Taíno history. Right, we gonna learn Shorty's roots. This video is from 4 years ago. What on earth happened to the Taíno, indigenous people of the Caribbean? Hmm. So let's dive down into this video.
place European explorers landed in the Americas? Was it Mexico, the United States, Brazil? Well, actually,
Wait, what the hell did you just say?
where was the first place European explorers landed in the Americas? Was it Mexico, the United States, Brazil? Well, actually, it was Greenland over 1,000 years ago. But
Greenland?
when discussing the more recent European colonialism, the first ships to set sail from the Old World led by Christopher Columbus landed
Oh,
in an unknown island in the Lucayan archipelago.
he said Europeans. I'm over here thinking about the indigenous. I said, wait, the indigenous made it to Greenland? Okay, let's continue. Let's continue. Misunderstanding. Shorty tripping. I don't know. Maybe I'm for pop. Like, what the hell?
Ago, what we refer to today as the modern day Bahamas. Subsequent waves of Europeans had very volatile interactions with the natives of these islands, to say the least. But with the introduction of Old World diseases into the native population, their fate was set as soon as the first interactions between these two wildly disparate populations took place. And it's claimed that by the year 1600, only 100 years after first contact, virtually the entire Taíno ethnicity and other natives of the Caribbean had gone extinct through a combination of enslavement, warfare, and epidemics, completely changing the demographic landscape of this region forever. What exactly is the Caribbean, though? Well, other than being used to describe the large open body of water connected to the Atlantic Ocean as a geographic descriptor, the Caribbean region, or West Indies as it is colloquially known, is generally used to describe the various island chains that box in the Caribbean Sea from the Atlantic Ocean, divided into a number of archipelagos stretching from South America to North America, including the Lesser Antilles in the east, which includes Barbados, Trinidad, and others, the ABC
Damn.
Islands in the south, which includes Aruba, Bonaire, and Curacao, three constituent countries of the Netherlands, the Greater Antilles in the west, which includes Cuba.
Wait. 3 countries of the Netherlands are part of the Caribbean too? I didn't even know that the Netherlands were a part of the Caribbean. What?
Hispaniola, Jamaica, and Puerto Rico, and finally the Lucayan Archipelago in the north, which includes the Bahamas, Turks, and Caicos Islands. At European contact, there were around 1 million people living throughout the Caribbean, including over 700,000.
Yo, the Caribbean is big as hell. I only knew of a few places because of the places that everybody talks about the most. But who would have thought that it went all the way to the Netherlands? Where's Whoopi at?
On the island of Hispaniola, which on this one island would have been a population density about the same as Argentina today, or 3 times higher than that of Canada. However, keep in mind that these early Caribbean natives were not a single unified ethno-linguistic group and arrived in their new island home at varying points in time, although interestingly, nearly all of them seem to have originated from South America rather than North America, despite the distance and close proximity to the mainland of both continents. But it's actually now known that virtually all Amerindian tribes in the Caribbean started on the northern coast of South America, what is now Venezuela, and proceeded to move north along the Lesser Antilles, hopping from island to island in various waves.
So that means that there's Taínos in Venezuela too. I didn't even know about Venezuela. I knew about Honduras and I think Brazil, but I did not know about Venezuela. So there is Taínos in Venezuela too. Damn. You know what I think happened, right? I think that the Taínos are the descendants of the Arawaks. I think that we are, yes, Taínos, right? But we're descendants of the Arawaks. Anybody that, had an ancestor that is Arawak is a Taíno now. Or, like I said, I mean, I got 2 theories to this, man. And one of them got to be it, man, because it can't be no other way. It's either that or they try to, erase history. They try to erase the Arawaks completely and name them Taínos. Rename them. Listen, man, we're gonna learn, man. Like I said, this is only part one of diving deep down into a shorty's roots.
And settling down along the way. The most archaic and isolated group were people located on the farthest western tip of Cuba and the nearby island of Juventud that were dubbed by the Spanish as the Guanahatabe, and were not related to any other known Caribbean natives or those from the mainland. As a hunter-gatherer society, the Guanahatabe were most likely descended from the first, or at least the oldest surviving migration wave from the mainland, most likely at least 3,100 BC. That's older than most of the pyramids of Egypt at over 5,000 years old, although Amerindians have inhabited South America for at least 10,000 years.
See my
The next
point?
wave of migrants to enter the Caribbean were the Taíno, perhaps the most widely distributed and most numerous people group in the region, and were distantly related to a larger ethnic macro group known as the Arawakan peoples on the mainland of South America, with the Taínos spreading out to the Bahamas, Puerto Rico, Jamaica, Hispaniola, and most of the remainder of Cuba, divided between a few main groupings which may or may not have been mutually intelligible. The other major group of the Caribbean was the Caribs, a smaller Arawakan ethnic group located in the Lesser Antilles. And before you ask,
okay, so there's another subdivision to the Arawaks. So now we got the Caribs. So the descendants of the Arawaks are not just Taínos, they're also Caribs. Caribs. I hope I'm saying the name right. And this is why I love listening, to the stories and stuff like that, because it shows you, it tells you more. And I love listening to the people that are a part of history. Like, listen, man, let me tell y'all, when I was a health aide, right, one of my patients was showing me pictures and telling me the story of her being a part of the Martin Luther King March. And she was there when the whole Malcolm X situation happened and everything. Like watching them videos, watching them, how can I say them pictures with her and listening to her stories, I learned way more than what these schools taught me. She had history in her house. So this is why I love hearing, the people that have the actual history in their hands. I don't go by he say, she say, none of that, man. I go down that rabbit hole like I was taught, man. The first person to tell me to go down the rabbit hole was my baby pops. The second person to tell me to go down that damn rabbit hole was the Word. If y'all haven't checked out the Word, make sure y'all go check out the Word 9%, man. Great conversations, great topics. And he will break down a lot of this stuff for y'all. I don't know if he knows about the Taíno, history, but I do know that he will break down astrology, the gods, and a lot of stuff that happens and has went down in history for a lot of people, like if you was in kindergarten. But let's get back on topic, because that's another topic for another live. The Taíno history is crazy. So it seems that they're from the Arawaks. There's two subdivisions, right? The Taínos and the let's go back. I can't even say the name. I didn't even know that. I thought it was just Taínos that came from the Arawaks.
A smaller Arawakan ethnic group located in the Lesser Antilles. And before you ask, it was actually the Caribbean that was named after the Carib people. The Caribs, a smaller Arawakan.
Okay, so the Taínos and the Caribs come from the Arawaks. I really thought that it was only the Taínos. This is why I would love to hear from people that are actually in the island, right? People that, heard stories from their grandparents, from their parents, from their great-grandparents, and much more. Because I would love to, I know that those stories would, be more on point than what I would hear from a teacher or somebody that's been reading a book. Like, who better than to tell the story than the people that are actually there, that know their ancestors, that got the scriptures, the writings on the walls, and much more. Hey, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong.
An ethnic group located in the Lesser Antilles. And before you ask, it was actually the Caribbean that was named after the Carib people, rather than the people being named after the region. The situation gets a bit more complicated for Trinidad and Tobago, which actually have multiple indigenous peoples, including the aforementioned island Caribs, as well as the Locono and Warao, while Aruba, Bonaire, and Curacao were originally inhabited by Arawakan Caquito people. Though due to their isolation from the rest of the Caribbean islands, their culture was more similar to that on the mainland than in the Greater Antilles. Areas that are also often associated with the Caribbean, such as Bermuda in the Atlantic Ocean and the Cayman Islands in between Mexico and Jamaica, actually had no indigenous population by the time the first Europeans arrived. But that doesn't mean their modern populations don't have any Amerindian blood, as migrants brought from other Caribbean.
And it's crazy, right? Because I've learned that, in these places, like, they don't store their history the way that in America does. The same way, I mean, Puerto Rico has done it. So Puerto Rico is doing it. Puerto Rico is starting to store their history and much like, and stuff like that. But it's messed up, like in, places like in Jamaica, like their history hasn't been yet really all the way documented, right? And I'm not, like I said, I'm not bashing nobody. I'm not bringing nobody down, but they're starting to do it just like Puerto Rico is too. And that's the crazy part, because just the same way that people in the island don't know their, real history, there's people in other, places and parts of the Caribbean that don't know their history. But shout out to the ones that do. Shout out to the ones that got that third eye open.
Caribbean islands may have had partial native ancestry. So this leads us to what exactly happened to the million or so natives of the Caribbean, which, as you could guess, is quite the tragic history. As being the first area of the Americas that the Spaniards came across, it was also the first to be conquered and integrated into the Spanish Empire, with diseases such as measles, smallpox, and the flu being the greatest weapons of the Spanish, and the greater technological advancement of the Spanish put down any large-scale rebellions by the.
Yo, that shit makes you think, man. Earth, right? Our Earth, right? It gives you everything that you need so that you could, be healthy or better yourself, right? But it's crazy how until the Spaniards invaded these places, nobody knew about viruses. Nobody even knew about getting sick. And it gets you to think, like, why? How? What made these places so different? Why didn't the Europeans know about, I mean, if they were so heavy on being clean and shit like that, or was it that the indigenous people taught them how to be clean? Especially the Moors, because you know how it's crazy, right? Even in America, right? When you learn the history about a lot of the black people, right? You learn about the Moors, right? Was it the Moors that taught the, Europeans and, the Americans and all that? Listen, it's hard to break it down and explain, but I'm gonna just how it comes out, right? How to be clean? Because they made all indigenous people seem like dirty people. But when you look at it, right, I think they were the most cleanest because they even used the plants, right? There's a plant that develops soap that you can wash your soap with. I mean, and it's been talked about throughout history. It gets you to think. The brainwash and the manipulation, allegedly.
The Taíno. After this, many of the remaining natives were enslaved or fled to the interiors of the larger islands, although there was considerable intermixing between them, as many Spaniards who arrived on Hispaniola or Cuba often took Taíno wives, with their mestizo offspring often becoming conquistadors themselves and aiding in the conquest of the rest of the New World. However, by and large, the biggest demographic change to occur to the Caribbean islands would be the importation of slaves from sub-Saharan Africa, who were quickly pumped in to replace the dwindling Taíno population, and they would proceed to eventually become the majority in the French and British Caribbean territories, while in the Spanish territories it was a bit different, as most of the time the Spanish or mestizo men would intermix with these imported Africans, creating a new hybridized population. There are even some accounts of escaped African slaves moving and integrating into Taíno villages, although eventually the entirety of the populations of these islands would become Hispanicized, with the Taíno and African languages being replaced by Spanish, and racial identification on the island becoming rather fluid, with all inhabitants eventually becoming more or less connected in some way. Although anecdotes of
So that would explain why the language has changed throughout, the centuries, throughout the years. That would explain why, a lot of the cover-ups for a lot of, a cover-up for a lot of, of the reasons why they say that indigenous people are extinct when they're really not. And it's crazy, right? Because growing up, they made you think that indigenous people were these people, these white people with paint on their faces. They rode horses that always scream. And that's not even true. Huh. It's crazy, right?
Surviving Taíno exists well into the 1600s in the Greater Antilles, one of the only regions where the natives were able to actually survive the conquest, disease, and massacres were in these smaller islands, with England and France agreeing to make Dominica and St. Vincent into a Carib or Kalinago refuge, although eventually England would annex these islands as well. And with the importation of Africans to these islands, it would appear that the last of the native Caribbeans were about to be washed away forever. However, a group of escaped African slaves from St. Vincent would actually end up intermixing with some of the native Caribs, creating a hybrid Afro-Amerindian or Zambo people that were highly opposed to the British rule, and ended up being deported to Central America, where their descendants are known as the Garifuna, or Guaranagua today, still speaking their own distinct Arawakan dialect rather than English or Spanish, being located mostly in Honduras and Belize. In Dominica, however, the Kalinago actually did survive in the northeast corner of the island, making them the last of Hispaniola and most of the remainder of Cuba.
So was he trying to say that in Honduras they got Taínos too? See, that's something new that I learned today. That's why I like watching these videos. And trust me, I'm going back down the rabbit hole because I've learned of certain countries that I didn't know they had Taínos in them. But my two questions still don't go away.
Divided between a few main groupings, which may or may not have been mutually intelligible. The other major group of the Caribbean was the Caribs, a smaller Arawakan ethnic group located in the Lesser Antilles. And before you ask, it was actually the Caribbean that was named after the Carib people, rather than the people being named after the region. The situation gets a bit more complicated for Trinidad and Tobago, which actually have multiple indigenous peoples, including the aforementioned island Caribs, as well as the Locono and Warao, while Aruba, Bonaire, and Curacao were originally inhabited by Arawakan Caquito people, though due to their isolation from the rest of the Caribbean islands, their culture was more similar to that on the mainland than in the greater.
Is he trying to say that the Arawaks were still around when the subdivisions of the Arawaks were starting to come out, like the, Caribbeans, and I can't even say the name right, so don't judge the shorty, and the Taínos? So these two groups came from the Arawaks. Did they come from the Arawaks, or did they change the names? I didn't even know that other group existed. So now. Wow.
Antilles, areas that are also often associated with the Caribbean, such as Bermuda in the Atlantic Ocean, and the Cayman Islands in between Mexico and Jamaica, actually had no indigenous population by the time the first Europeans arrived. But that doesn't mean their modern populations don't have any Amerindian blood, as migrants brought from other Caribbean islands may have had partial native ancestry. So this leads us to what exactly happened to the million or so natives of the Caribbean, which, as you could guess, is quite the tragic history. As being the first area of the Americas that the Spaniards came across, it was also the first to be conquered and integrated into the Spanish Empire, with diseases such as measles, smallpox, and the flu being the greatest weapons of the Spanish, and the greater technological advancement of the Spanish put down any large-scale rebellions by the Taíno.
So I have a question now, hearing this. Yeah, I'm glad, see, when I go back, you hear things, right? When you re-listen to these videos, but this is my first time, but I just went back for the second time, right? Did the Europeans really beat the indigenous people by using weapons, or was it because they got them sick? Listen to what he just said. We'll go back a little further.
Natives of the Caribbean, which, as you could guess, is quite the tragic history. As being the first area of the Americas that the Spaniards came across, it was also the first to be conquered and integrated into the Spanish Empire, with diseases such as measles, smallpox, and the flu being the greatest weapons of the Spanish, and the greater technological advancement of the Spanish put down any large-scale rebellions by the Taíno. After this, many of the remaining natives were enslaved or fled to the interiors of the larger islands, although there was considerable intermixing between them, as many Spaniards who arrived on Hispaniola or Cuba often took Taíno wives, with their mestizo offspring often becoming conquistadors themselves and aiding in the conquest of the rest of the New World. However,
Oh,
by and large, the biggest demographic change to occur to the Caribbean islands would be the importation of slaves from sub-Saharan Africa, who were quickly pumped in to replace the dwindling Taíno population, and they would proceed to eventually become the majority in the French and British Caribbean territories, while in the Spanish territories it was a bit different, as most of the time the Spanish or mestizo men would intermix with these imported Africans, creating a newly
wow.
hybridized population. There are even some accounts of escaped African slaves moving and integrating into Taíno villages, although eventually the entirety of the populations of these islands would become Hispanicized, with the Taíno and African languages being replaced by Spanish, and racial identification on the island becoming rather fluid, with all inhabitants eventually becoming more or less connected in some way.
All right. So now listening to this, right? What if, right? Maybe, hey, listen, it's a random thought. It could be another theory, right? All right. So y'all heard both my other theories, right? So what if, right? All right. So what if the Tainos and the Caribs, weren't made because the Taino, the Arawaks, mixed with like, other tribes, right? These two tribes became a subdivision of whatever tribe, got together and made it with the Arawaks, right? All right. So, all right, there goes that part right there, right? Then here comes the Spaniards and they invade the Caribbeans, right? And then, they take, the Taino women and the Carib women, right, as wives. And boom, here we come, the Puerto Ricans and, you know, other ethnicities, right? So what if that's what happened? I mean, so far I got three theories. Listen, man, like I said, I'm just learning. So far I got three theories. These are open panels. Anybody want to come up, y'all more than welcome. Like I said, I'm going to be on this joint as long as the shorty's earthly goods last. So we on here, we learning, we're diving deep down into a shorty's roots, right? What are our Taínos? Where do they come from, right? Or are the Arawaks our ancestors and our Taínos the descendants of the Arawaks, right? Like I said before, or right, is it that they try to erase history, right? And the Arawaks never ever, right, disappeared or were extinct, right? And they try to replace them by naming them Taínos because of how they spoke. Or could the Taínos and the Caribs be, a subdivision of the Arawaks because the Arawaks just, made it with other tribes, right? And here we are, and here are the Caribs, right? From Jamaica, Haiti, Africa, Puerto Rico, Santo Domingo, and Cuba, right? Because that's where the Taínos originally came from, right? And we're the descendants, right? After what happened with the Spaniards, we're the descendants of the Arawaks. Hey, like I tell y'all, man, we don't know everything, and because of what happened allegedly with the Spaniards, right? The Spaniards could have really tainted a lot of our history, but you cannot take away what was written on them caves, what was written on the walls, what our ancestors left behind for us to know what happened. Like I said, I'm learning along right with a lot of you. There's a lot of people that don't know who Taínos were, and I could sit here and tell y'all that my family comes from that tribe. I'm a descendant of the Taínos, if anything. Oh, you're more than welcome to pull up 22 Ronin. The link is in the chat, and the link is also in my community room. Anybody's more than welcome to talk about. We're talking about our roots, about history. Y'all more than welcome to come up, have a conversation with a shorty. I will pause the video, put it to the side, and have a conversation. I'm up here as long as my earthly goods are here. And I'm on some E&J today. I'm used to Jack Daniels, but I'm on some E&J today. So, hey, like I said, I'm more than welcome. The link is also in my community wall. Oh, and by the way, yo, let me give a shout out to my old head. You know, he could be shout out and crazy sometimes. Let's give a big shout out to 22 Rolling. If y'all into the bullshit, into y'all into the ish, into he got some positive topics. But if y'all into the ish, y'all can go check out 22 Rolling. Right? He calls himself a troll. I call him a G. I call him my old head because he be speaking. Listen, I don't care how much trolling he does. He be spitting some gems. So make sure y'all go check out 22 Rolling. I don't know if he's a mod, but if he's not, he's about to be. Make sure y'all go check out my old head, man. I be watching him in the bushes because he do be into the ish. He do be into the bullshit. So I be in the bushes when I watch him. So, but make sure y'all check out my old head, man, especially if y'all into the bullshit. But I do listen to him because he be spitting out some gems. But let me get back on topic, but the link is there in the chat for those that want to, hop up and hop on panel and talk to a shorty. But this is an open panel. I will chat with y'all in the chat. But like I said, for those of you that want to start a conversation with a shorty, y'all more than welcome. Hop on a panel, talk. We're talking about our roots. I don't know what y'all roots are, but a shorty's roots, right, have been Taíno, right? I feel as though we're descendants from the Arawaks. If not, well, us now in this era, we're descendants from the Arawaks. But if not, I feel as though that also, they could have tried to erase the Arawak history and replaced it with the Taíno history, right? And then we're the descendants of the Arawak / Taínos, but what are the descendants, right? If our ancestors are Arawaks, what would that make us? But like I said, that's a random thought. Let's continue. My bad. I apologize. I had to give my old head a shout out. Old slave trick introduced by Fat Joe. Really? That's one of his songs? Wait a minute, 22 Rolling threw me off track. Let me get back on track. Hold on.
Although anecdotes of surviving Taíno exist well into the 1600s in the Greater Antilles, one of the only regions where the natives were able to actually survive the conquest, disease, and massacres were in these smaller islands, with England and France agreeing to make Dominica and St. Vincent into a Carib or Kalinago refuge, although eventually England would annex these islands as well. And with the importation of Africans to these islands, it would appear that the last of the native Caribbeans were about to be washed away forever. However, a group of escaped African slaves from St. Vincent would actually end up intermixing with some of the native Caribs, creating a hybrid Afro-Amerindian or Zambo people that were highly opposed to the British rule, and ended up being deported to Central America, where their descendants are known as the Garifuna, or Guaranagua today, still speaking their own distinct Arawakan dialect rather than English or Spanish, being located mostly in Honduras and Belize. In Dominica, however,
oh snap! So in Honduras and Bolivia, they actually speak the Arabic language. Oh snap! I definitely want to learn my native language, yo, for real. But you know what's crazy? Watching these videos, right? I don't know how many of y'all have been watching me from the beginning, but I can honestly sit here and say that I didn't know that as a Puerto, as someone that was born in the island, right, in the Caribbean, in the islands, right, in Ponce, Puerto Rico, I did not know that what we thought was slang our whole life was part of our native tongue, part of our native language. That today has been a shocker to me. I'm gonna be very honest to say that.
The Kalinago actually did survive in the northeast corner of the island, making them the last remnants of the pre-contact indigenous Caribs, although in recent years there's been substantial intermixing with their neighbors in Dominica, leaving only a few hundred full-blooded members remaining, as most in the Kalinago community have African or European ancestry as well, but they're still quite the vibrant community, making up around 3% of the island and growing, actually. Due to the history of intermixing with many of the Caribbean natives, their genetics and
oh shit, my bad. Before I forget, right, the link is in my description box down below. For those of y'all that can't hit the link right in the chat, right, and the link is also in my community wall. If you have a phone, it might be hard or difficult sometimes for you to hit the link in my chat. So y'all might have to go to my description box and hit the link, or go into my community wall and hit the link. So let's continue. My bad.
Possibly even to a greater extent, their culture and traditions still live on in almost every modern nation in the region, as most Afro-Caribbeans have a degree of European and smaller Amerindian admixture. And in the case of the Hispanic Caribbean, it's been found through genetic studies that the whiter any individual is in these nations, the more likely it is that Amerindian DNA makes up a greater part of their non-European ancestry. In total, Native American ancestry still continues to make up around 7% of the overall genome of the entire Caribbean.
Oh, wow.
Greatly depending, of course, on self-identified ethnicity as well as region, as it's been found that
Yo, ABC Islands, right? Let me see. ABC Islands is the blue. European is the orange. Yellow is African. Green is MENA. Purple is East Asian. I don't know if that's sky blue. I think that's baby blue. South Asian, right? And when you look at Puerto Rico, right, we got blue here. It's a nice little portion of blue, right? Native American. Then you've got a majority of European. Then you got a nice little portion of African, and then a nice little portion of MENA, and then a nice little portion of South Asian. Oh shit. According to them, Haiti got a nice amount of portion of African. Jamaicans got a lot of African in them. So do we come from Africa or Jamaica? They say Africa is a motherland, but can we believe this statistics? I'm not sure. 22 Roni. The link, if you try refreshing the page, right, if you hit the link on my description box, you should be able to hit my live. If you hit it from my community wall, you should be able to hit the live too. Let me see. I'm gonna share it on my community wall one more time. So if y'all go to my community wall, y'all should be able to hit my link. Hold on one second. I'm doing it now. So hold on, give me 1 second. Let's see. All right, I just shared it. So give it like 3 minutes and it should pop up on my community wall for anybody that wants to hit the link. All right. So I do apologize for that. But yeah, if you go to my community wall, it should be easier for anybody to hit that link right there. So it is on my community wall. No, you cannot hit it from, if you're on a phone and you're trying to hit the link from my chat, it's not going to work unless you're on a laptop or a computer. Now, if you go to my description, right, or you go into my community wall, right, if you go to my channel, right, let me show y'all real quick. But I appreciate everybody that's showing a Shorty support, that is helping a Shorty bring awareness and much more. But it's crazy, man. I would have thought that we had more Jamaican in us than African, but it seems that we have a lot of African in us. Like if you can see the yellow lines, right, mark Africa. Caribbean total. What is Lesser Antilles? Huh. Dominican Republic got a little bit of everything. Puerto Rico got a lot of European in it. Jamaica got a lot of African in it. Damn, that's crazy. Haiti got a lot of African in them. No Asian. Anybody that's from Haiti doesn't have no Asian in them. I mean, no Asian in them. My bad. But in Puerto Rico, we got some. Do we got some Asian in us? Oh, Puerto Ricans don't have no Asian, apparently, according to whatever analytics or statistics they got this from. But let's continue. Let's continue. My bad. My bad. I don't want to get thrown off track.
Mixed race Puerto Ricans have around 20 to 25% Taíno ancestry, while groups like the Haitians have almost none, existing only in trace amounts, suggesting a total population replacement. This may not sound like a whole lot, but out of the total population of the Caribbean being 45 million people today, this is equivalent to around 3.2 million full-blooded Caribbean Native Americans, with the highest geographic concentration in these nations. The more likely it is that
I'm sorry, I had to go back so I could, understand a little better because I interrupted him with my own commentary. But I have to give this commentary because if not, YouTube will not let this video play. But let's continue.
Amerindian DNA makes up a greater part of their non-European ancestry. In total, Native American ancestry still continues to make up around 7% of the overall genome of the entire Caribbean, greatly depending, of course, on self-identified ethnicity as well as region, as it's been found that mixed-race Puerto Ricans have around 20 to 25% Taíno ancestry, while groups like the Haitians have almost none, existing only in trace amounts, suggesting a total population replacement. This may not sound like a whole lot, but out of the
He's saying a whole population replacement. So do I believe the analytics or do I believe the people in Haiti that got the real stories? I feel as though right? I'm going towards the people in Haiti who got the real stories, who got the, who got proof of the writings on the wall and whatever was left behind from our ancestors. I'm not going to sit here and believe the people that sat here and tried to massacre my ancestors. I'm not believing that story. There's no way in hell.
The total population of the Caribbean being 45 million people today, this is equivalent to around 3.2 million full-blooded Caribbean Native Americans, with the highest geographic concentration being in Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic, although the modern Caribbean island with the highest percentage of Amerindian admixture as a proportion of the national gene pool would be Aruba. Not terribly surprising, seeing how it is one of the closest islands to the mainland. Even in most Anglo-West Indian countries, Afro-Caribbeans still have varying amounts of Amerindian DNA on average, possibly as high as 3 or 4% in Jamaica and the Virgin Islands, 5% in the Bahamas, and between 6 to 8% in St. Kitts, St. Vincent, Grenada, and St. Lucia, and possibly even higher than this in the Afro-Trinidadian population. Compare this to Black Americans in the United States, who on average have only 1% Native American blood, or the average white American who has even less than that. And it would appear that the United States, and I suppose Haiti as well, are some of the sole anomalies of the Americas, that being some of the only places in the hemisphere where Native American ancestry is not as widespread, as even in most parts of the Caribbean, their Native American genetics and heritage still lives on in the present day. In Puerto Rico, there has been a bit of a Taíno cultural revival, with many embracing their indigenous roots, and in the 2010 U.S. Census, around 10,000 Puerto Ricans identified as Native American, being an interesting example of an ethnic group being revived literally from extinction, although many members of this Neo-Taíno
shit. If you find out that you're about to be extinct, wouldn't you want your voice to be heard? Shit, I know I would. Listen, man, I've listened from stories from my family members all the way on down to, people that claim to be Taínos. And they all got pictures, they all got videos, they all got proof. And I'm not saying that videos go all the way back to the 1500s, but if you got videos from the early 1900s that prove that you was part of a tribe, you got pictures. Listen, my grandmother from my dad's side, I've seen pictures of her in a hut in Puerto Rico. I've seen pictures of their, what they do traditionally, of their heritage, of their culture. So it's kind of like, you can't take the fact these are originals. You see where I'm coming from? You can't falsify the original at all. Hey, correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe I'm tripping. But if they're descendants from the Arawaks, from the Taínos, why can't they claim? Why can't we claim to be indigenous? Is my biggest question. If there's proof out there that our ancestors are indigenous, why in the world the ones that want to keep their history going and their heritage going cannot claim to be an indigenous person? What's crazy and what I think is fucked up, right? Puerto Rico is an island, right? that is part of the United States. And if there's people in there, there's tribes in there that claim to be, indigenous, that say, yo, listen, I'm black. My ancestors are Haitian, African, and Jamaican, and I want to be considered as indigenous. They should have the rights to be considered as indigenous. What's crazy is, right, Jamaica doesn't have that right because Jamaica is considered, as they're not part of the United States. It's crazy as we come from these places, especially from allegedly Africa. Huh. Let us surely know what y'all think down below.
Community have argued that there is simply a continuation of the former Taíno people and culture, although it's unknown if these self-identified Taíno have any more Native American DNA on average, or whether they just have the right amount of European and African DNA to look vaguely native. But either way, their embracing of their Amerindian heritage is part of a wider movement in Latin America to identify with the whole of their ancestry, uniting the region in their uniquely shared history, with the Taíno, Caribs, and other Arawakan people native to the Caribbean being one of the most important chapters in that history. So please let me know your thoughts on the natives of the Caribbean, and for today's poll, let me know which region of the Caribbean you'd like to learn more about.
I would love to learn all of them. Because as far as I know, and there's proof behind what I'm saying, I'm gonna have to go to fucking Puerto Rico, right? And not even who can I talk to here in Philly? Because I know, but I just want to. Because listen, this is the problem, right? This is the problem that I have. This is the issue that I have, right? Not a lot of people like being in camera. Not a lot of people like talking about certain things. So I would have to figure out how I can go about this. Who in the family is willing to go on camera and speak about a lot of stuff? See, not everybody is about clicks and views or none of that. See, and I'm not here for clicks and views. I'm here to bring awareness because a lot of people don't know about the Taíno heritage, right? And I just started learning about this maybe 7 years ago, right? I'm 35 years old, right? And the first time that I really started getting interested in my heritage and my ethnicity and where I come from and who I am is when my kids started asking questions. When I was pregnant with my daughter. That's crazy. That's when I really started getting interested in my heritage, in my ethnicity, who I am and where I come from. I don't know if other people can relate, but I know that that's when I really started going deep into my roots. But it's crazy how a lot of people that are from these islands don't even know what Arawaks or a Taíno is, but there's supposed to be proof out there that they existed. But let us surely know what y'all think about, everything that we're talking about in the comments down below.